Hi, this is Gary with MacMost.com. Are you trying to decide whether to buy a MacBook Neo or an iPad? Let's compare them both. So Apple's new low-cost MacBook Neo has a lot of people trying to figure out whether they should be getting a MacBook Neo or an iPad. There's a lot of overlap in the capabilities and the prices for these two products. But it's very hard to actually compare the two, because in some ways they're very different and in other ways they're very similar. Plus, there are many different ways to configure them, particularly the iPad. If we look at the MacBook Neo, for instance, there are really only two configurations if you don't think about color. There's just the lower price model at 256 gigs of storage for $599 and the one that doubles that storage and adds Touch ID for $699. And that's it. There are only those two options. If you want something more, you have to go to the MacBook Air and the prices jump above $1,000. The iPad, on the other hand, has a ton of different configurations. You can start on the very low end with the standard iPad and only 128 gigs of storage. That only costs $349. Clearly a much lower cost than the MacBook Neo. But you're getting much less as well. You're getting half the storage of the base MacBook Neo. You're getting a much smaller 11-inch screen, and you're not getting any keyboard or trackpad with that. As soon as you start to add things to make it more like the MacBook Neo, it becomes pretty expensive. For instance, at just 256 gigs, if you add the keyboard and trackpad that Apple sells, plus the pencil, which is maybe the reason you want to consider an iPad over a MacBook Neo, the price jumps to more expensive than the most expensive MacBook Neo. And other configurations bring it up even more. For instance, even just that base iPad at 512 gigs with the cellular option, another advantage over the Neo, plus the keyboard, plus the pencil, is well above $1,000. You could still stay under the price of a MacBook Neo if you get the iPad mini, but at meager storage, and that's an even smaller screen. If you look at the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro, you've got various different price points. If you go to the 13-inch size screen to match the Neo, and you get a decent amount of storage to match the Neo as well, it's more expensive than the Neo. Add a keyboard, add a pencil, and the price goes up and up. So let's compare the two when it comes to weight, because both are pretty lightweight. And if you're considering an iPad, that may be a big factor. Now, the MacBook Neo is 2.7 pounds or 1.23 kilograms. With the iPad, you can go much lower than that. A standard iPad is just about a pound, and the iPad mini is less than a pound. Most of the models stick to just above 1 pound, but that is without the keyboard and trackpad. So just the tablet. If you're going to add in keyboard and trackpad, the total weight for both the iPad and the keyboard goes to something above 2 pounds and gets pretty close to what a MacBook Neo weighs. And it's a similar story for size. The MacBook Neo is just under 12 inches wide by 8 inches deep, and the height or thickness is half an inch. iPads can be smaller than that. The iPad mini is much smaller, of course, but the 11-inch iPads, whether it's the standard, the Air, or the Pro, is definitely smaller than a MacBook Neo. The 13 inches are about the same size. Now, the thickness of the iPad is always going to be about half of that of the MacBook Neo, but that's because it doesn't include the keyboard and trackpad. Once you add that, if you're going with a 13-inch iPad, the size and the weight become very similar. Now let's compare the hardware that you actually get with both of these. Of course, with the MacBook Neo, the keyboard and trackpad are built in. They're always there, and they are included in the price. With the iPad, the Magic Keyboard that includes a trackpad, or there's a Folio keyboard as well that includes a trackpad, those are additional hardware, and there are different prices depending upon which model of iPad you're looking at. Now, the screen size of the MacBook Neo is just one screen size, 13-inch. And you can get a 13-inch iPad as well to match that. But you can also get an iPad that's smaller, 11 inches, and that's good and bad. Good for weight and size, but bad if you want to see a lot or multitask. You can also, of course, go with the iPad mini and get something even smaller. A huge difference, though, with the screen is that the MacBook screen is not a touch screen. No Macs have touch screens, but the iPad screen, of course, is a touch screen, and that's actually the only way to interact with it unless you get the keyboard and trackpad. Also, you can get an Apple Pencil with the iPad. And you can use that, of course, for drawing, note-taking, things like that. No such option is available for the MacBook Neo. So when it comes to hardware, you actually have more capabilities with the iPad, although most of those capabilities are additional hardware that you have to buy. Now, perhaps the biggest difference and the clear divider between the MacBook Neo and the iPad is that the MacBook Neo is a Mac. It runs Mac OS and Mac software. The iPad, that runs iPad OS and it runs iPad software that you could only get from the App Store. So there's a clear division between the MacBook Neo, which is an actual computer with a computer operating system that runs computer software, and the iPad, which is a mobile device that runs mobile or tablet software and runs mobile or tablet apps. Now, you actually can run some iPad apps on the MacBook Neo. As a matter of fact, technically you could run all iPad apps, but it's up to the developer of the app to allow that. And a lot don't, sometimes because they haven't developed an interface that works without a touchscreen, some because of licensing or legal issues, and others just decided not to support the Mac, so they've unchecked that box. But a lot of iPad apps will work on the MacBook Neo. The same for iPhone apps. Most iPhone apps will just work on the iPad. Either there's an iPad mode where it works with a larger screen, or you're actually seeing the iPhone app on your iPad screen. It's exactly the same app. You're just looking at it on a larger screen. Now, you can also use iPhone apps on any Mac as long as the developer okays it, which a lot of times is not the case. However, since the MacBook Neo is running Mac OS, a feature of Mac OS is iPhone mirroring. So you can mirror your iPhone screen on your MacBook Neo, allowing you to control your iPhone and see what's on your iPhone on your Mac's screen. A really useful feature of Mac OS that isn't available on iPad OS. And then beyond that, there are just a lot of apps that are only available for a computer operating system. In particular, developer apps, for instance. A lot of development apps and some creative apps are only available for Mac OS and not for iPad OS. Sometimes you have a stripped down or lesser version for the iPad. So if there are apps you need to use in particular, and you're thinking about getting an iPad, make sure that those apps will work on the iPad. Don't assume because there's a Mac version that there's an iPad version, because often that isn't the case. Oh, and another major difference here when it comes to software is the App Store. For the iPad, you can only get apps through the App Store, and Apple's got rules about what apps can be available in the App Store. The Mac has an App Store as well with those same rules, but you can download apps from other places directly from the developer in a lot of cases, which a lot of developer apps and creative apps will do. They prefer to deploy their own apps. This lets them update their apps more frequently or provide like system extensions and tools that aren't allowed according to App Store rules. It's a very different software ecosystem to be on a computer operating system like Mac OS versus a walled garden App Store system like iPad OS. So let's break down the advantages to having an iPad. You've got, of course, the touchscreen. You could add an Apple Pencil and do drawing on it. You can separate the iPad from its keyboard, meaning that you could just use it as a tablet only, which you may want to do for a lot of situations like reading or watching videos, or even just doing things with the Apple Pencil where you really don't need the keyboard. Most configurations of the iPad will either be slightly lighter and smaller than a MacBook Neo, but some configurations, like just using the tablet by itself, are considerably smaller and lighter. And also, a lot of casual games and social media apps are only available on the iPhone and iPad. They don't have computer or desktop versions for Windows or Mac. So consider that there are some apps that you can run only on the iPad or iPhone and not on a Mac. So the iPad is a clear winner if you only use it for certain things. Like, for instance, reading. You clearly want to read on a tablet and not a laptop. Watching video, there's really no point to having the entirety of a computer with the keyboard always attached for just watching video. Of course, you've got the Apple Pencil for drawing and also note-taking. A lot of people like to use it for note-taking with the touchscreen. And if you don't need a keyboard for note-taking, then you've got an advantage with the iPad there. And for any apps that may only just run in a tablet or mobile environment. If you find these videos valuable, consider joining the more than 3,000 others that support MacMost through Patreon. You get exclusive content, course discounts, and more. You can read about it at macmost.com/Patreon. So let's look at the advantages of the MacBook Neo. And the main one is it's a real computer operating system. You're running the same Mac OS that every other Mac is running. So you have Windows all over the place. You can work with your files as you might expect on a computer, whereas it's much more limited on the iPad. You can get developer and a lot more creative apps. For instance, if you need to use the terminal or anything that runs in the terminal, you're going to want a Mac. If you're using a creative app that doesn't have an iPad version like Blender or something like that, there are tons of apps out there that you can get for the Mac that just are not available for the iPad. Also, multitasking is still much better, even though the iPad has made some really good strides recently. Multitasking, if you're using like 7 or 8 different windows at once and quickly switching between them and all of that, then you clearly need Mac OS, not iPad OS. And then also, if you want the full laptop experience, pricing an iPad with the extra hardware is going to cost more. So the MacBook Neo wins on price if you want all those extras. So the MacBook Neo is the winner if you have to use a wide range of developer or creative apps, if you want traditional file management and multitasking, if you just want a no compromise laptop. It's a laptop. It's not a tablet that you're trying to use like a laptop. Then the Neo is the winner. If you're currently using Mac OS and you're thinking that an iPad might be an interesting mobile device for you, you're probably going to run into a lot of frustration and a big learning curve to try to do things with iPad OS that you're used to doing on the Mac. And I do want to point out that in a lot of situations, neither device is going to be perfect. For instance, if you need a device to read books, then an iPad wins. But if you also want full computer apps, well, you just can't really get both of those with one device. If you want to play a lot of casual games that are only available on the iPhone and iPad, but you want the full laptop experience, you're not going to be able to do it with one device. Small and light, like an iPad mini, for instance, but you also want a larger screen for more complex tasks, you're going to need either 2 different size iPads or a MacBook and an iPad. And if you want pencil drawing and developer tools, just like using the terminal, something simple like that, again, you're not going to get that really in one device. And that's going to make it hard for a lot of people to decide if they need a lot of the capabilities of both devices, but could only get one of the 2 devices. You're going to have to decide which things you can do without. And in the end, only you can really decide which one that you want. I encourage you to try both out, get into an Apple store or another store that has both on display that you can play around with them. Sometimes the choice becomes obvious once you actually try each of the devices. And let me know in the comments below if you think there are other important factors when trying to decide between a MacBook Neo and an iPad. Thanks for watching. Want to know about every new MacMost video each week? Sign up for the absolutely free MacMost email newsletter at macmost.com/newsletter.